I'm Maya Peterson, 31, and for as long as I can remember, my little sister, Chloe, has been my universe. Growing up, our parents ran a bustling bakery, leaving me to step into the role of Chloe's protector. I'd braid her hair before school, chase away playground bullies, and console her through first heartbreaks with endless rom-coms and ice cream. We were inseparable, our lives a shared tapestry of secrets and dreams. After college, I carved out a solid career as a senior investigator for the Financial Integrity Bureau, or FIB. My job involves untangling complex financial schemes, meticulously sifting through data to expose fraud. It's detail-oriented work, and I've earned a reputation for spotting inconsistencies others miss, often bringing down the biggest names in finance. Chloe, on the other hand, gravitated towards the vibrant world of marketing. She loved creativity, the buzz of new ideas. 2 years ago, she landed a dream job as marketing director at Vance Global Solutions, a rapidly expanding tech finance firm in San Francisco, headed by its charismatic founder, Alexander Vance. "He's brilliant, Maya," she gushed over our weekly video calls. "Everyone says he's the next big thing in Silicon Valley, building a $1 billion empire in just 5 years. I nodded politely, but a familiar flicker of professional skepticism ignited within me. In my experience, overnight success stories in the tech finance world often had complicated backstories. Their relationship escalated at a dizzying pace. What started as casual work compliments soon morphed into romantic dinners. 8 months later, Chloe called me, her voice trembling with excitement, to announce her engagement. Alexander had proposed during a weekend getaway at his sprawling vineyard estate in Napa Valley. "Don't you think this is moving a little fast?" I asked, twirling the straw in my iced tea at our favorite San Francisco cafe. Chloe's eyes sparkled with a happiness I hadn't seen since before our parents passed. "When you know, she insisted. "Alexander is everything I've ever wanted. Successful, thoughtful, ambitious." I tried, truly, to be supportive. But something about Alexander Vance unsettled me. Whenever we met, he'd dominate conversations, subtly undermine Chloe's opinions, and talk exclusively about his own achievements. My protective instincts flared. Chloe's maid of honor, Sarah Miller, shared my concerns. "He's a bit controlling," she whispered to me at the engagement party. "Did you notice how he corrected Chloe's story about how they met? Like her version wasn't good enough." My friend Jessica Chen, who also attended, texted me later. "That guy has a serious ego. His name dropping is exhausting." The situation grew even more complicated when I ran into Ethan Davis, my ex-boyfriend from college, at Alexander's lavish engagement dinner. I nearly dropped my champagne glass. "Ethan? What are you doing here?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I work for Alexander now," Ethan explained, looking uncomfortable. "Investment Analysis Division. Been here about 6 months." This was the first I'd heard of it, despite my regular talks with Chloe. When I mentioned it to her, she seemed surprised. "Oh, I thought you knew. Alexander hired him from that big investment bank," says Ethan's one of his best analysts. The pieces weren't fitting. Ethan had always been in regulatory compliance, not investment analysis. His presence raised new questions, but Chloe was too consumed by wedding plans to notice my growing unease. 2 months before the wedding, I made one last attempt to voice my reservations. "Are you absolutely sure about Alexander?" I asked Chloe during a dress fitting. "Something about him just doesn't feel right." Her face hardened. "Just because you investigate fraud for a living doesn't mean everyone has something to hide, Maya. You've never even given Alexander a chance. He makes me happy, isn't that enough?" I backed off, recognizing the hurt in her voice. Perhaps I was being overprotective, letting my professional paranoia seep into my personal life. For Chloe's sake, I decided to try harder with Alexander. She deserved my support, not my suspicion. As the wedding approached, I made genuine efforts to connect with Alexander. At the engagement brunch hosted by his parents, I approached him with a warm smile. I'd love to hear more about how you started Vance Global, I offered. Chloe says your growth has been truly impressive. Alexander glanced at me while swirling his mimosa. It's pretty complicated stuff. Not sure it would make sense unless you're in high-level finance. I'm a senior financial investigator, I reminded him. I might follow better than you think. Right, for the government, he replied with a dismissive chuckle. A bit different from what we do in the real world of Silicon Valley finance. This pattern continued at every pre-wedding event. Alexander would acknowledge me briefly, then find reasons to speak with someone else. When conversations turned to my career, he'd make subtle digs about government inefficiency or regulatory overreach. At a family dinner 6 weeks before the wedding, he even referred to my agency as Silicon Valley's school monitors, while his business friends laughed. Chloe either didn't notice these interactions or chose to ignore them. When I brought them up, she'd sigh, "He's just stressed about work, Maya. The firm is going through a massive expansion." The rehearsal dinner, held at an exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking the San Francisco skyline, proved particularly tense. I was seated at the family table, but noticed Alexander had placed me at the opposite end from him and Chloe. When I stood to give my 5-minute toast as Chloe's only sister, Alexander checked his expensive watch 3 times. Later that evening, I excused myself to the restroom and accidentally overheard Alexander speaking with his business partner, Marcus Thorne, in a quiet hallway near the bar. "Chloe's sister is becoming a problem," Alexander said in a low voice. "She keeps asking questions about the firm." "Is she suspicious?" Marcus asked, sounding concerned. "She's a nobody government agent," Alexander replied dismissively. "But she's nosy. After tomorrow, I'll make sure Chloe sees less of her." I froze, pressed against the wall, my heart pounding. The conversation confirmed my worst fears about Alexander's character, but also triggered professional alarm bells. Why would he be concerned about my questions unless there was something to hide? The next morning, while helping Chloe with her wedding preparations, I received an urgent email from my colleague, Ben Carter at the FIB. It was flagged urgent. Foster Investments' potential irregularities in their Q3 filings. Isn't that your sister's fiancé's firm? My stomach dropped. The FIB had sophisticated algorithms that flagged suspicious patterns in financial reports. If Vance Global Solutions had been flagged, there was legitimate cause for concern. I stepped away from the bridal suite and called Ben. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked quietly. "Inconsistent profit reporting, unusual cash flow patterns," he listed. The system also flagged some offshore transfers that don't match their declared international operations. Nothing concrete yet, but enough to warrant a closer look. I thanked him and hung up, feeling sick. My professional and personal lives were colliding catastrophically. If Alexander's firm was engaged in financial misconduct, my sister was not only marrying a dishonest man, but potentially becoming legally entangled in his schemes. That evening, I called Jessica in a panic. "What do I do?" I asked, pacing my hotel room. "If I tell Chloe now, she'll think I'm trying to sabotage her wedding. If I don't, and there really is fraud happening, do you have actual proof of wrongdoing?" Jessica asked practically. "No, just suspicious patterns and the system flags," I admitted. "The investigation hasn't officially launched yet." "Then maybe wait," she advised cautiously. "Don't ruin what should be the happiest day of her life based on suspicions. But keep your eyes open." I agreed reluctantly. Without concrete evidence, accusing Alexander would only alienate Chloe. I decided to keep silent, hoping desperately that my professional paranoia was overreacting and the flags in the system would prove to be innocent anomalies. As I fell into an uneasy sleep that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's celebration would bring more than just a wedding. The morning of the wedding dawned with picture-perfect weather. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the bridal suite as makeup artists and hairstylists transformed Chloe into a vision in white. Her happiness was radiant, infectious, making my concerns feel distant and abstract. "You look stunning," I told her truthfully, blinking back tears when she emerged in her gown. Alexander will be breathless. The idyllic mood shattered when Alexander's mother, Victoria Vance, swept into the bridal suite. Victoria was a formidable woman, tall, immaculately dressed in designer clothes, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and calculating eyes. "Chloe, darling, you look acceptable," she said, surveying my sister critically. "Though I still think the designer gown would have photographed better for Vogue." Then her gaze landed on me, and her polite smile thinned. "Maya, that bridesmaid dress is interesting on your figure." I bit my tongue, reminding myself this was Chloe's day. "Thank you for the beautiful venue, Victoria," I said. "It's gorgeous." "Yes, well, when Alexander said he wanted a small wedding, I had to intervene," she dismissed. "Vances don't do small anything." As the bridal party assembled for photos before the ceremony, Alexander arrived for the couple's first look. He was undeniably handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his confidence magnetic. When he turned and saw Chloe, his reaction seemed genuine, his eyes widening, voice catching as he told her she was beautiful. Yet, during the family photos that followed, I noticed a pattern. Alexander subtly maneuvered me to the edges of every group shot, sometimes whispering directions to the photographer that relocated me behind taller family members. In several key photos, I was positioned so far from Chloe that we weren't even in the same frame. "Could we get one with just me and my sister?" I requested during a break. The photographer looked to Alexander, who checked his watch. "We're running behind schedule, maybe during the reception." That photo never happened. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Vaulted ceilings adorned with hanging floral arrangements, a string quartet playing softly, hundreds of candles illuminating the historic San Francisco church. Watching Chloe walk down the aisle, I felt a complex mixture of love, pride, and apprehension. After the vows were exchanged, we moved to the reception at the Grand Legacy Hotel. The ballroom had been transformed into a romantic wonderland with crystal chandeliers, white orchids cascading from ceiling installations, and tables draped in silk. As I entered the cocktail hour, I searched for my place card at the family table. After several confused minutes, a coordinator directed me to a table near the kitchen entrance, clearly not with family and bridal party, as tradition dictated for the bride's only sister. "There must be a mistake," I said, showing her my title in the program. "Sister of the bride." The seating chart was finalized by Mr. Vance himself this morning, she replied apologetically. "I'm not authorized to make changes." I retreated to the bar, fighting back angry tears, when a familiar voice spoke behind me. "They did you dirty with that table assignment." I turned to find Ethan looking uncomfortable in his groomsman attire. "Ethan, hi. Enjoying the party?" I forced a smile, not wanting to discuss the seating drama. "Listen, Maya," he said, lowering his voice. "I need to talk to you. It's about Vance Global Solutions." My professional instincts immediately sharpened. "What about it?" "Not here," he murmured, glancing around nervously. "Meet me on the terrace in 20 minutes. I nodded, suddenly forgetting about seating charts and photo placement. 20 minutes later, I slipped onto the terrace, finding Ethan in a shadowy corner away from other guests. "I've been wanting to contact you professionally for weeks," he began without preamble. "But with you being Chloe's sister, it's complicated." "What's going on, Ethan?" He pulled out his phone. "I was hired by Alexander because of my regulatory background. I think he wanted someone who could help skirt reporting requirements without technically breaking laws. But what I found goes way beyond gray areas." He showed me a series of spreadsheets and documents. Even in the dim lighting, I could see what had alarmed him. Evidence of systematic misrepresentation of assets, fabricated performance reports, and troubling international money transfers. "This looks like textbook securities fraud," I whispered, my professional training kicking in. "And possibly money laundering through these Caribbean accounts." "That's what I thought," he confirmed. "I've been documenting everything discreetly. Alexander suspects nothing. He thinks I'm completely loyal." "Why are you showing me this now?" "At their wedding?" Ethan's expression grew serious. Because they're leaving for a 2-week honeymoon tomorrow, and Alexander mentioned cleaning house while they're away. I think he's planning to destroy evidence. As I tried to process this information, I noticed several wedding guests watching our intense conversation with curiosity. I recognized Alexander's business associates, looking at us with suspicion. "I should get back inside," I said quietly. "Send me these files securely. I'll make sure they reach the right people at the Fib." Just as Ethan agreed, I spotted Alexander across the terrace, his eyes narrowing as he took in our private conversation. He whispered something to Marcus, who immediately started walking in our direction. I quickly rejoined the reception, my mind racing. The professional implications were clear. I had an ethical obligation to report what Ethan had shown me. But the personal consequences would be devastating. Chloe would be humiliated, heartbroken, and possibly implicated if she had unknowingly participated in any of Alexander's business dealings. For the first time that day, I questioned whether staying silent had been the right choice. Perhaps ruining the wedding would have been kinder than allowing Chloe to bind herself legally to a fraud. The reception reached its full swing as twilight deepened outside the grand ballroom's windows. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over towering floral arrangements, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. Despite being relegated to a distant table, I made my way toward Chloe, determined to at least congratulate her properly. She looked radiant, greeting guests with Alexander by her side. Her eyes lit up when she saw me approaching. "Maya, isn't everything magical?" she exclaimed, pulling me into a quick hug. "I can't believe we pulled it off." "Everything is beautiful," I agreed, genuinely happy to see her joy. "You're the most gorgeous bride I've ever seen." Alexander cleared his throat. "Darling, your father's old business partner is waiting to speak with us." He nodded curtly in my direction, not bothering with a greeting, before steering Chloe away. Throughout dinner, Alexander made a point of publicly acknowledging everyone in Chloe's life, thanking her elderly aunt for her special wedding quilt, recognizing our uncle who had walked Chloe down the aisle in our father's absence, even mentioning Chloe's childhood piano teacher who had sent a congratulatory letter. Everyone except me, her only sister, her closest family. "Is something going on between you and Alexander?" asked Mrs. Henderson, our mother's best friend, who was seated at my isolation table. "I would have expected you to be sitting with the family." I forced a smile. "Just a mix-up with the seating arrangements." Mrs. Henderson replied, clearly unconvinced. "Seems odd. Your parents would have wanted you right beside Chloe today." The mention of our parents sent a pang through my chest. They would have seen through Alexander immediately. My father, with his straightforward business ethics, would have investigated Alexander thoroughly before allowing the relationship to progress. My mother would have noticed how he subtly controlled Chloe's movements, choices, and social interactions. After dinner, I finally managed to approach Chloe alone while Alexander was speaking with some investors. Her cheeks were flushed from champagne and dancing, her eyes bright. "Hey sis," I said warmly. "Having the time of your life?" "Absolutely. Though I've barely had a chance to eat anything," she laughed. "Listen, I wanted to ask you something." Before she could continue, Alexander materialized beside her. He looked me up and down with a dismissive smirk that made my skin crawl. "Chloe, darling, the Andersons are leaving. We need to say goodbye," he interrupted, as if I weren't mid-conversation. "Oh, I was just talking to Maya about. The Andersons manage over $50 million with us." Alexander cut in. "They can't leave without a proper goodbye from both of us." As he led Chloe away, I caught the apologetic glance she threw over her shoulder. It was a familiar expression, the same look she'd given me repeatedly over the past year whenever Alexander interrupted, dismissed, or spoke over her. I retreated to the bar where Sarah found me nursing a gin and tonic. "This is messed up," she said bluntly. "Everyone's noticed how he's treating you." Even my boyfriend asked why the bride's sister is sitting near the kitchen instead of at the head table. "I don't want to cause a scene," I replied, watching Alexander holding court across the room. This is Chloe's day. Is it though? Sarah asked pointedly. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like Alexander's show, and Chloe is just his co-star. Before I could respond, Chloe waved us over to join a group conversation with some of Alexander's colleagues. I approached cautiously, aware of Alexander's eyes tracking my movement. So, as I was saying, I heard Alexander explaining to the group. The new tax structures actually benefit certain investment strategies if you know how to structure the holdings properly. That sounds fascinating, I said, genuinely interested in the financial discussion. At the FIB, we've been seeing a lot of creative interpretations of those regulations. The group fell awkwardly silent. Alexander's jaw tightened. Maya works for the Financial Integrity Bureau, he explained to his colleagues, his tone making it sound like I collected garbage for a living. Chloe's sister, he added, as if that explained my presence. What exactly do you do there? Asked one of the men, seeming genuinely interested. I'm a senior financial investigator, I began. We investigate. She shuffles paperwork, Alexander interrupted with a laugh. Now, about those offshore opportunities we were discussing. I stood there, completely cut off mid-sentence, as Alexander redirected the conversation. Chloe gave me another apologetic look but said nothing to correct her new husband's rudeness. As I walked away, humiliated, I spotted Marcus and Alexander huddled in an intense conversation near the cake table. Their body language caught my attention. The furtive glances, Alexander's aggressive gesturing, Marcus's nervous head shaking. I circled around, pretending to admire a flower arrangement while straining to hear their exchange. Has to be handled tonight, Alexander was saying firmly. I don't care what it takes. It's your wedding night, Marcus protested. Surely it can wait until… Nothing can wait, Alexander hissed. I want the situation contained before we leave for Bora Bora. Am I clear? Marcus nodded reluctantly. I'll handle it. As they separated, my phone vibrated with multiple incoming messages. I slipped into a quiet hallway to check, finding urgent texts from Ben at the office. Emergency meeting called for tomorrow morning. Vance Global Solutions investigation officially greenlit. Direct evidence of fraud received. Are you involved with this case? My heart raced. Ethan must have sent his evidence directly to the FIB. The investigation I'd suspected was now reality, and it was moving quickly. Another text came through. Maya, you need to distance yourself from this case immediately. Family connection is a massive conflict of interest. I leaned against the wall, suddenly dizzy. In less than 24 hours, my sister's world would implode. Her new husband would likely face criminal charges, their assets would be frozen, and the media would turn their fairy tale wedding into a public scandal. When I returned to the reception, the DJ was announcing dinner was complete and the formal toasts would begin. Alexander had grown increasingly drunk throughout the evening, his confident smile now amplified into something arrogant and loose. He clinked his glass repeatedly, calling for attention with the entitled air of someone who always expects to be heard. As he stood to begin his toast, he caught my eye across the room and shot me a triumphant look. The satisfied smirk of someone who believes they've won completely. In that moment, watching Alexander prepare to play the role of adoring husband while knowing what I knew, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't just about security violations or my wounded pride. This was about my sister's future, her safety, and the inevitable heartbreak that awaited her. Whether I spoke up now or remained silent. The ballroom fell silent as Alexander tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. Cameras flashed, capturing his confident smile as he began his toast, standing at the head table with Chloe beaming beside him. He looked every inch the successful businessman and devoted husband. Distinguished guests, family, and friends, he began smoothly. Today has been nothing short of magical, watching my beautiful bride walk down the aisle toward our future together. His practiced charm worked its magic on the crowd as he continued with flowery sentiments about love and partnership. I watched Chloe's face, noting how she gazed up at him adoringly, completely unaware of the house of cards they stood upon. I want to take a moment to thank those who made this day special, Alexander continued. To Victoria and Alexander Sr., thank you for raising me with ambition and vision. To Marcus, my best man and business partner, we've achieved the impossible together. He proceeded to thank Chloe's uncle for walking her down the aisle, her cousins for their support after her parents' passing, and even Sarah for being such a dedicated maid of honor and friend to my wife. The deliberate omission of my name hung in the air. Several guests glanced uncomfortably in my direction, recognizing the slight. Chloe's smile faltered slightly, but she remained silent beside her new husband. And of course, Alexander continued, his voice taking on a subtly different tone. I must acknowledge how fortunate Chloe has been to find success with our company, proving that talent and dedication are always recognized at Vance Global Solutions, regardless of background or connections. The implication was clear to anyone paying attention. That Chloe had earned her position through merit, while suggesting others might rely on nepotism or shortcuts. His eyes flicked briefly toward me. Some people, he continued, his voice lowering conspiratorially as if sharing a private joke with the room, spend their lives checking boxes and enforcing petty rules, never understanding what it takes to build something meaningful, to create real value. Scattered nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Those who knew I worked in financial regulation understood exactly who he was targeting. I sat perfectly still at my distant table, face burning but expression neutral. But enough about small thinking. Alexander smirked, raising his glass higher. Today we celebrate ambition realized. Vance Global Solutions continues its unprecedented growth with expansions into 3 new international markets next quarter and projections that will stun our competitors. My phone vibrated again in my clutch. Another message from Ben. Evidence suggests imminent destruction of documents. FIB seeking emergency warrant. Alexander was now making a joke about how Chloe had initially resisted his advances, describing her early reluctance in a way that painted her as naive and himself as persistent and ultimately victorious. Something about his characterization made my skin crawl, the subtle positioning of her independence as an obstacle he'd overcome. And I must say, he added with a theatrical wink toward his groomsmen, it's particularly satisfying when the unattainable finally recognizes the inevitable. More uncomfortable laughter. Chloe's smile had become fixed, her eyes darting briefly toward me as if seeking reassurance. So, while some family members might not approve, Alexander continued, his voice hardening slightly as he looked directly at me for the first time all day. Perhaps out of jealousy or simply an inability to recognize genuine success when they see it. The room grew awkwardly quiet. The best man, Marcus, shifted uncomfortably beside Alexander. Even Victoria Vance looked surprised by her son's overtly hostile tone. I think we can all agree, Alexander plowed on, raising his glass higher, that the sad, single sister working her government job shouldn't worry about those who are clearly thriving beyond her limited understanding of achievement. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Chloe's face drained of color. Alexander, she whispered, audibly enough that nearby guests could hear. That's enough. But Alexander was too far gone on champagne and arrogance to register her distress. To my beautiful bride, he declared triumphantly, who had the wisdom to align herself with success rather than mediocrity. The moment stretched before me like an eternity. I saw Chloe's mortification, Ethan's knowing look from across the room, Sarah's outraged expression, and most clearly, Alexander's smug certainty that he was untouchable. The weight of the evidence on my phone, the investigation launching tomorrow, and the devastation awaiting my sister regardless of my choice, it all crystallized into perfect clarity. I stood slowly, my chair scraping loudly in the awkward silence that followed Alexander's inappropriate toast. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward me. I think everyone should know, I said, my voice steady and clear despite my racing heart, that as of 9 a.m. tomorrow, Vance Global Solutions is being investigated for securities fraud and insider trading. And I have the evidence right here. Alexander's champagne glass froze midair. His face, flushed with alcohol and triumph just seconds before, drained to an ashen gray. The confidence in his eyes gave way to naked fear as he registered my words. Complete silence descended over the reception. 200 guests sat motionless, looking between Alexander's frozen figure and my calm stance. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "You're lying." Alexander finally managed, his voice strangled. This is pathetic, Maya. Trying to ruin our wedding because you're jealous." The Financial Integrity Bureau doesn't launch fraud investigations based on jealousy. I replied evenly. They do it based on evidence. Evidence like falsified performance reports, hidden offshore accounts, and manipulated client funds. Marcus Thorne abruptly sat down, looking ill. Several of Alexander's business associates began whispering urgently to each other. "Alexander." Chloe's voice was small, uncertain. "What is she talking about?" Alexander's eyes darted wildly around the room, likely calculating how many of his investors were present, how many potential witnesses were recording this moment on their phones. "This is absurd," he attempted, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate. "Maya has always resented my success. This is a pathetic attempt to undermine me." "Is that why Ethan Davis, your own employee, submitted evidence to the FIB yesterday?" I asked, nodding toward Ethan, who stood firmly despite the attention now directed his way. "Is that why your partner Marcus looks ready to pass out right now? Because this is all in my imagination?" The room erupted into chaotic murmurs. Victoria Vance rose shakily from her seat, her aristocratic composure crumbling as she looked between her son and the disintegrating celebration. I hadn't planned this moment, hadn't intended to create this public scene. But watching Alexander's carefully constructed facade collapse before my eyes, I recognized that sometimes the truth demands to be spoken, regardless of timing or social niceties. Chloe stood now too, her wedding gown shimmering under the chandelier lights as she took a step away from Alexander. "Tell me this isn't true," she demanded, her voice stronger now. "Tell me my sister is wrong." Alexander's silence was damning. The elegant reception deteriorated into chaos within minutes. Guests whispered urgently to each other, phones appeared as people searched for news about Vance Global Solutions, and several of Alexander's business associates made hasty exits, no doubt rushing to check their investments or contact their lawyers. Alexander recovered enough to launch a desperate counterattack. "This is slander," he shouted, pointing at me accusingly. "You're manipulating the situation because you've always been jealous of Chloe. You'll be hearing from my attorneys tomorrow." "Alexander, please," Chloe pleaded, her voice trembling. "Just tell me if it's true." "Of course it's not true," he snapped, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. "Your sister has always undermined our relationship. This is just her nuclear option." Ethan stepped forward, surprising everyone. "I submitted the evidence to the FIB myself," he stated clearly. "Performance reports were systematically falsified. Client funds were diverted to offshore accounts. I documented everything." Marcus, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly bolted for the exit. Two men I didn't recognize, but who had the unmistakable bearing of federal agents, intercepted him discreetly near the door. "This is ridiculous," Alexander sputtered, looking increasingly cornered. "Ethan is a disgruntled employee. He was about to be fired for incompetence." "Then explain why the FIB's algorithms flagged your Q3 reports," I countered. "Explain the irregular cash flows and the accounts in the Caribbean islands that don't match your declared international operations." Chloe swayed slightly, reaching for the table to steady herself. "You told me those accounts were for legitimate tax planning," she whispered. Alexander's face contorted with rage. "This is my wedding day. How dare you bring your petty government witch hunt into my celebration?" "Our celebration?" Chloe corrected quietly, tears now streaming down her face. "It was supposed to be our celebration." Victoria Vance swept forward, her designer heels clicking purposefully across the dance floor as she inserted herself between Alexander and Chloe. "This is outrageous," she declared, focusing her icy glare on me. The Peterson family has always been jealous of success. Your sister married above her station, and now you're trying to drag Alexander down to your level. Mrs. Vance, I replied evenly. The FIB doesn't care about social stations, they care about investor protections and federal securities laws. Show me this so-called evidence. Chloe demanded suddenly, her voice stronger than I'd heard it all day. She extended her hand toward me, wedding ring catching the light. I deserved to see it for myself. I hesitated, then nodded, retrieving my phone and opening the secure files Ethan had sent. I walked to Chloe, conscious of every eye in the room following my movement. As I approached, Alexander lunged forward, attempting to intercept the phone. Don't listen to her manipulations. But Chloe stepped away from him, creating distance for the first time that day. She took my phone with trembling hands and began scrolling through the documents. Her marketing background hadn't prepared her for complex financial analysis, but even she could understand the highlighted discrepancies, the massive differences between reported and actual numbers, and the incriminating emails from Alexander to Marcus discussing how to create the narrative our clients need to see. These are your emails, she whispered, looking up at Alexander. This is your signature on these wire transfers. Business is complicated. He blustered. You're looking at normal operations taken out of context. Is that why you've been telling Marcus to handle the situation tonight? I asked. Because everything is above board and normal? Alexander's face contorted. You were spying on me at my own wedding. I overheard you, I corrected. There's a difference. Chloe continued scrolling, her expression growing more horrified with each document. There are clients I know personally on this list, she said, her voice hollow. People who trusted you with their retirement funds, their children's college savings. Alexander's mother attempted damage control, addressing the stunned guests. A small misunderstanding between family members, she announced with a brittle smile. Please continue enjoying the celebration while we sort this out privately. But it was far too late for privacy. Several guests were already on their phones, no doubt contacting their financial advisors if they had investments with Vance Global. Others were clearly recording the unfolding drama. Alexander, seeing his carefully constructed world crumbling, made a desperate move toward the exit. This is absurd. I'm calling my attorney. As he attempted to push past several guests, the doors to the ballroom opened, revealing 3 individuals in suits who I recognized instantly as colleagues from the FIB's enforcement division. Ben Carter, my direct supervisor, nodded grimly in my direction before approaching Alexander. Mr. Vance, he stated formally. I'm Ben Carter from the Financial Integrity Bureau. We need to ask you some questions regarding Vance Global Solutions. You have no authority here. Alexander snarled. This is my wedding. We have a warrant. Ben replied calmly, producing an official document. And we have reason to believe evidence relevant to an ongoing investigation may be destroyed tonight, based on communications we've intercepted. Alexander looked wildly around the room, perhaps searching for an escape route or ally. His eyes landed on Chloe, who stood clutching my phone, her wedding dress now seeming like an elaborate costume in a play that had taken a dark turn. Chloe, he pleaded, suddenly sounding vulnerable for the first time. You know me. You know I wouldn't do anything illegal. Your sister has manipulated this situation. Chloe looked from Alexander to me, then back to the phone in her hands. These documents have your signature, Alexander. Your words. Your instructions. Her voice broke. How could you involve me in this? Everything I did was for us. He insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. For our future. The Napa estate. The lifestyle you wanted. I never wanted any of that if it came from hurting people, she whispered. Victoria attempted one final intervention, her voice sharp with command. Alexander, say nothing further. We'll call Stanley from legal and sort this misunderstanding out immediately. But the situation had moved beyond her control. Ben and his colleagues were now firmly escorting Alexander toward a side exit, away from the cameras and curious guests. This isn't over, Alexander called back, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Maya. Both of you will." As Alexander disappeared through the door with the FIB representatives, the remaining guests stood in shocked silence. The string quartet, which had stopped playing during the confrontation, tentatively began a soft melody that seemed jarringly inappropriate for the shattered celebration. Chloe handed my phone back, her expression unreadable beneath her smeared makeup and tear-streaked face. "I need to be alone," she whispered, gathering her voluminous skirts and moving quickly toward the bridal suite. I followed her instinctively, ignoring the stares and whispers that trailed in our wake. Victoria Vance attempted to intercept us, but Sarah smoothly blocked her path, buying us precious seconds to escape the ballroom. In the privacy of the bridal suite, Chloe collapsed onto a velvet settee, her wedding gown pooling around her like an elaborate white island. She stared at her diamond ring, twisting it absently on her finger. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked quietly, the question I had been dreading since this nightmare began. 3 months after what the financial press dubbed the wedding day whistleblower, I sat across from Chloe at our favorite cafe. Autumn had transformed the San Francisco park outside, painting the trees in fiery oranges and reds. My sister looked different too, thinner certainly, but also somehow more substantial, as if adversity had burned away something superficial and revealed a stronger core underneath. "The annulment was finalized yesterday," she announced, stirring her latte absently. "Technically, I was Mrs. Vance for exactly 12 weeks and 0 happy days." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "How are you feeling about it?" "Relieved, mainly," she admitted. "The legal team proved I had no knowledge of the fraud, so at least I'm not facing charges, unlike Alexander." The aftermath of the wedding had unfolded like a financial thriller. Alexander Vance was now awaiting trial on multiple federal charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Vance Global Solutions had been placed under receivership, with forensic accountants painstakingly tracing millions in misappropriated funds. Marcus Thorne had turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced charges, revealing a scheme more extensive than even I had suspected. "Have you heard from Victoria?" I asked cautiously. Chloe gave a bitter laugh. "Only through her attorneys. She's still insisting Alexander is innocent, and I betrayed the family by not standing by him. As if loyalty requires becoming an accessory to fraud." The days following the wedding had been the hardest. Chloe had initially been furious with me, her shock and humiliation manifesting as anger toward the messenger rather than the perpetrator. She'd moved into a hotel, refusing my calls and texts for nearly 2 weeks. "I couldn't face anyone," she explained later, when she finally agreed to meet. "Every time my phone buzzed, it was another reporter, another client, another friend asking how I could not have known." That first post-wedding conversation had been agonizing, sitting in her sterile hotel room surrounded by the unopened wedding gifts she couldn't bear to return, yet couldn't stand to keep. "I trusted him completely," she'd sobbed. "I promoted his firm to my friends, my college roommates, even my thesis advisor. People invested their savings because they trusted me." "That's exactly what he counted on," I told her gently. "Your credibility, your connections, your trustworthiness." Now, 3 months later, the rawness had begun to fade. Chloe had cooperated fully with investigators, helping them understand the marketing materials that had been used to attract investors. Her willing assistance had helped cement her status as another victim rather than a co-conspirator. "I'm starting over professionally," she announced, straightening her shoulders. "I've been offered a position with a consumer protection nonprofit, using my marketing skills to help people avoid scams rather than unwittingly promoting them." "That's perfect for you," I said sincerely. "You've always wanted work with meaning." "I would never have had the courage to make such a change before all this," she admitted. "I was too dazzled by the prestige, the paycheck, the lifestyle." Our relationship had been fundamentally altered by the wedding day revelation, but not in the way I had feared. After the initial shock and anger, we had gradually rebuilt something more honest, more equal. The sister dynamic of protector and protected had evolved into a partnership of mutual respect. I've been thinking about starting my own consulting firm, Chloe continued, a new enthusiasm lighting her eyes. Helping companies align their marketing with ethical business practices. There's actually a huge demand for it after several high-profile fraud cases this year. That's brilliant. I encouraged. You understand both sides of it now, in a way few people do. I already have 3 potential clients, she added with a small, proud smile. Former Vance investors who don't blame me for what happened. They've seen how I've handled the aftermath. Have you thought about a name for the firm? I asked. Peterson Integrity Consulting, she replied without hesitation. Using our family name feels right. Dad would approve, don't you think? The mention of our father brought unexpected tears to my eyes. He would be incredibly proud of you, I said softly. Not many people could bounce back from what you've been through with such grace. Chloe reached for my hand again. I've been meaning to thank you properly. What you did took extraordinary courage. You risked our relationship, public humiliation, everything, because it was the right thing to do. I should have told you my suspicions sooner, I admitted, before the wedding. I was trying to protect your happiness. I wouldn't have believed you then, she said simply. I was too invested in the fantasy. I needed to see the evidence with my own eyes, in that moment, to break the spell. As we finished our coffees, Sarah and Jessica joined us, our small support circle that had proved invaluable during the turbulent months. They arrived bearing folders and laptops, ready for what had become our weekly strategy session for Chloe's new business venture. Ladies, Sarah announced, sliding into the booth beside Chloe. I've drafted the website content and social media strategy. Very tasteful, very rising from the ashes without actually mentioning. You know who, or the wedding that shall not be named. And I've run the numbers on your business plan, Jessica added, opening her laptop. With your expertise and unfortunately high-profile experience, we can position you uniquely in the market. No one else has your credibility on ethics. I watched my sister absorb their enthusiasm, her posture straightening, her expression brightening. The transformation from heartbroken bride to determined entrepreneur wasn't complete, but the trajectory was clear. You know what still amazes me, Chloe said, looking around our small group. That day, in that moment when everything fell apart, it felt like the end of my world. But it was actually the beginning of something more authentic. Sometimes losing something is necessary to gain what truly matters. I reflected. You lost the fantasy, but found yourself. Chloe nodded thoughtfully. The hardest lesson was learning that sometimes the truth hurts terribly before it heals. I was so angry with you for speaking up, but now I'm grateful every day that you had the courage I lacked. As our impromptu business meeting continued around the cafe table, I felt a profound sense of peace replace the guilt and uncertainty that had plagued me since the wedding. The path of truth is rarely the easiest one, but it's the only one that allows for genuine connection and growth. In the end, what had seemed like a catastrophic ending had become a powerful beginning. Chloe wasn't just recovering, she was reinventing herself with newfound strength and purpose. Our relationship, tested by fire, had emerged stronger and more authentic than before. The wedding day revelation that froze Alexander mid-toast had shattered illusions, certainly, but from those broken pieces, something far more valuable was being constructed. A life built on truth, integrity, and the courage to stand for what's right, even when it's devastatingly difficult. My journey through Chloe's wedding was a whirlwind of emotions, a collision of my personal life and professional ethics. It taught me profound lessons that I believe can resonate with anyone navigating the complexities of life. First, trust your gut, especially when it whispers warnings. My professional skepticism and protective instincts toward Chloe were red flags I initially dismissed for the sake of happiness. I learned that sometimes our intuition is a sophisticated alarm system, picking up on inconsistencies our conscious mind might overlook. Don't ignore those subtle feelings of unease. They are often guiding you toward a truth you need to uncover, even if it's uncomfortable. Second, speaking your truth, however difficult, is an act of profound love. Standing up at that wedding, Knowing I was shattering my sister's dream was the hardest thing I've ever done. The fear of ruining our relationship, of public humiliation, was immense. But allowing Chloe to walk into a life built on deceit would have been a deeper, more agonizing betrayal. True love isn't about protecting someone from all pain, it's about having the courage to expose what truly threatens them, even if it means temporary hurt. The healing that follows honesty is deeper and more lasting than any comfort found in denial. Third, betrayal, though devastating, can be a catalyst for immense growth. Chloe's world imploded that day. She faced humiliation, lost a future she believed in, and had to rebuild her life from scratch. But through that fire, she discovered a strength, purpose, and clarity she never knew she possessed. She found her authentic self, unburdened by a false image of success. Sometimes, losing a flawed fantasy is necessary to gain genuine self-worth and a path aligned with your true values. Finally, your support system is invaluable. My friends, Sarah and Jessica, and my colleague Ben, stood by me and Chloe through the storm. They offered practical advice, emotional support, and unwavering belief. Don't try to navigate life's toughest moments alone. Lean on those who truly care about you, who see your worth and remind you of it when you're at your lowest. This experience redefined my understanding of courage, love, and integrity. It proved that while the path of truth is rarely easy, it is the only one that leads to authentic connections and a life lived with purpose. It also highlighted the importance of vigilance, not just in finance, but in all our relationships, recognizing the true nature of people and the foundations on which our lives are built. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to speak an uncomfortable truth, risking a relationship, but knowing it was the right thing to do? Or have you experienced a profound betrayal that ultimately led you to a stronger version of yourself? I'd love to hear your stories and your insights in the comments below. Sharing our experiences helps us all feel less alone in our struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life narratives, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes. Speaking up is the greatest act of love, even when it doesn't feel that way in the moment. Thank you for being here.